Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, Jon Chee. In our last episode, we spoke with Kate about IP strategy for biotechs, focusing on specifics like aligning scientific advancements with proactive patent strategies and navigating international patenting and resource constraints. If you missed it, be sure to go back and listen to part 3. In part 4, we conclude our conversation with Kate as she shares why securing a patent is just the beginning, highlighting the role of enforcement and the balance between litigation and licensing. We'll also discuss the importance of technology transfer, collaborating with academic institutions, and embracing innovation through incremental advancements. Kate also reflects on her journey from the lab to becoming a partner at her firm, offering advice for those hesitant to take risks in their careers.
And, once, we've been talking about like the, securing the patent and the process of doing that. What about when it comes to actually enforcing? Like, that is also, I'm going to imagine, time, effort, and because when I was, again, just like talking to our CLO, it's like, hey, you got the trademark, but you got to actually enforce the thing.
Right.
You can't just not do anything with it. Because
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, if you don't enforce it, they can just take it away from you, right?
Right. It still has a trademark. Yeah. It still has
Yeah.
to be in use somewhere. So if it's not in use for a certain amount of time, it can just kind of die or is free for other people
Yeah.
to use. Again, I'm not a trademark attorney, but
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
that's
Totally.
mostly
Totally.
right.
And so when it comes to, the kind of actually enforcing, I mean, this is a world that I am not too familiar with. Kind of how should a company think about enforcing their intellectual property rights for this hard, this hard-earned patent?
Yeah. It's hard. It's a difficult decision because if you get into litigation, it can be time consuming and money consuming.
Yeah.
I am not a litigator. I just do patent office stuff.
Yep.
But I talk to our litigators, and I have clients that have, been involved in litigation and, have talked about litigation, and you're like, is it worth it? Do we just approach them for a license? Where's the fine line between us enforcing our patent versus just sinking money into something that ultimately we could have just licensed in the beginning? And so it's a business decision of how much cost. It goes back to earlier. What's the risk you're willing to take, and how much are you willing to invest, and what do you think you're going to get back in return? Because, depending on what the patent is, if you have two competing products and it's already on the market, patent office, FDA, they're less likely to just pull a drug that's useful off the market than just say, you guys work it out and you pay them some money,
Figure
and
this
everybody
out.
will be work together and figure this out. It can be solved with money. And so a lot of things, you could just do the settlement or the negotiations about licensing up front as compared to getting involved into litigation. And I don't know the statistic, but people file lawsuits, but most of them settle before they actually go to trial. So the reality is no one really wants to be involved in litigation.
Yeah.
I don't think. So you have to, because that's, if you think the patent office process is long, I think the litigation will take potentially just as long. It's a 4 to 5 year investment of time.
Ooh. Yeah.
So
everyone's like, let's figure this out amicably.
Basically. Can we work together? Because who's got that kind of time?
Yeah. And I think something that's interesting too that I'm learning is that it is kind of this marriage of sometimes it can just be a business decision, and it's despite it being like we have the patent on this thing, but sometimes it will just boil down to like this business decision and like what are you ready to do and willing to do
hmm
to kind of like protect this like legal protection that you have. And I think too, like when it comes, I would imagine that on the flip side too, there is a time when you should go to the mat,
Right. Right.
right? And it doesn't always boil down to that business decision.
Right.
It's like we're going to do this,
Yeah.
and it could be like make or break for us.
Right.
And we talk about like enforcing your, if you have a patent enforcing your IP, but I was also going to imagine it like for companies that rely on IP all the time, and you're probably getting a lawsuit too. Like I want to
hmm
imagine that's not like a uncommon occurrence. Um,
Right.
and you got
Yeah.
to figure out a way to
Potentially.
defend.
hmm Yeah. Again, you get some people are send you things and you're like, maybe is it a cease and desist letter? Do I worry about this? Because as you alluded to earlier, like even if you try to enforce your patent, one of the analyses to do before that is how strong is my patent? Because someone on the flip side, they're going to say, well, your patent is invalid, so it doesn't matter. So you have to be confident that your patent is also not going to be invalidated. So that's the risk you also have to think about. If you want to enforce your patent, you have to think of it, it's a very strong patent.
Absolutely. And for the startups out there, the first example I gave was like this kind of like tech transfer where
Mhm.
you're kind of like there's probably a existing intellectual property wherever it may be in the
Right.
process. It's already kind of there. Um, can you just talk about like for these founders out there and from the lens of like intellectual property, any advice for like securing their next big idea and like what are the considerations when it comes to like doing that tech transfer process and or not going that route?
I mean, it's hard because it seems like a lot of new like the nascent ideas and startups do often come from kind of university technology that maybe the university doesn't have the resources and they spin it out. From there, it doesn't mean that, once you're kind of improving or adding on to that technology, it's still it's still the company's now. It's not the universities anymore. So don't be afraid and think, oh, I can't patent anything new because it's still the universities or some other small companies. Like if you add your stamp to it and you have your inventive concepts, it's yours now. So the other hard part, I mean, you can do a startup, but it's hard to be a self startup from a biotech company. I think it's not a great thing to do from your garage.
Yep.
It's definitely not GMP.
Yeah,
safe, I
yeah.
don't
Yeah.
think. Not my garage, at least. So it's harder to get the seed money to start without kind of that pre-IP, I think, unless you're independently wealthy, unfortunately. But if you have a great idea and you have ways to show people that it's a good idea, you do have some lab space or you contracted with a CRO, maybe you're not doing it, but you're like, hey, CRO, I have this great idea and I have this, maybe it's a known compound and you want to use it in a new indication, that's still patentable and you can get a third party to do the work. As long as you have some of that proof of concept, you can still file your application on it. So maybe you didn't have to do the work yourself. So it doesn't necessarily have to come out of the university if you have the seed money, to start it yourself. But it's really all about
Correct me if I'm
the
wrong.
concept.
But like all like with that kind of, I perhaps I used, perhaps academia is like a very popular method of doing this, but like also I'm going to imagine the larger pharmas are also, they're going to like look to like, you can in license from them, like instead, or
Yeah.
other sources outside of academia.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, I don't know how many have done this, and I think Eli Lilly, or maybe is it Boehringer Ingelheim, have set up some like websites of like of compounds they've shelved. And like if you can look through those and it's like, oh, do you have an idea on this shelved compound, right? Like it might not have worked for whatever they were using it for, and they just kind of shut that program down. And so there are ways to look at what other companies have done and try to in-license that as well. I don't know, what the terms are like for
Yeah,
those,
yeah,
but
yeah.
was like, I don't know what the terms are like for those.
Yeah.
But it is possible, and they are doing a lot more of that so that these compounds that have been proven a little bit, right? They've been made so you can synthesize them. They've done a little bit of maybe some early toxicology, but maybe it just didn't work for, again, whatever they were looking at it for. So there are places to mine for some of that. I just don't know what all they are. But yeah, you could in-license from there. Or, I think a lot of some smaller startups, they're people that worked at bigger companies. So they've seen,
Yep.
they've seen what it's like and they know some of the goings on. But from my experience here, sitting in my office and having the clients, that's still different than being in a big company.
Absolutely.
Like having
Absolutely.
to run the show yourselves and, like you're saying, wear all of the hats and make sure everybody's doing what they need to do is still different when you leave the nest.
And I think something that was really stands out to me, and I right now for investors, all you could hear is like de-risk, 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 de-risk. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
We're gonna de-risk. Like we're trying to de-risk. All right. But like I was like trying to think about like what are the avenues, right? And like exactly what you said, like big pharma has a lot of like IP which they shelve because they can't do everything under.
Right.
And it's not to say that that's like a slam dunk and it's like completely de-risked, but like, for those, and I even know a lot of investors who are like going to like academic tech transfer offices and are mining, right? Trying to find these next opportunities. But like, for anyone out there who's like looking for that next big idea, it's like that's decently de-risked. But they shelved it for a reason too.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, they shelved it for a reason. But I think there's like there's a number of companies out there. I can't at the top of my head, like, is it Roivant or like Bridge Bio or there are companies out there.
They're built on that. Yeah.
Built on that concept, but a little bit more punk rock. I guess it's like a little bit more punk rock, but like, it makes a lot of sense. You're like, it was worthy of actually doing some work on it. And you can bring a unique lens and an approach to it. And I think it was either one of those companies actually got a major outcome, like a really successful outcome of something from, I think they got from Boehringer Ingelheim, I think.
Yeah.
And so, there's I guess it's like one person's like trash could be another person's gold.
Absolutely. Like because maybe they, being the biochemist or the chemistry person, like if you look at it and you're like, well, maybe if I just modify it this way and they didn't think of that and I can use it for something else or it'll work for this thing. So yeah, like I think it's great. Saves a lot of time.
Yeah, saves a ton of time, and time is money. So like, right, just like and are there, as you're like thinking about like any of these, there's obviously like there's options and pathways and approaches, to kind of go about this, but for startups that are now kind of kicking off this journey, are there any other kind of like common pitfalls that like obviously one, like be careful what you say in the public domain. Are there any like other common pitfalls that you would advise startups to avoid and maybe some just like key considerations?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, and I think maybe sometimes it's finding the right people. So, I know if you're looking for investors, they'll often like put someone from their board or somebody leading the company. And I think it's hard as a scientist, from what I've seen from some of my clients, to let it go. But I think sometimes the best thing can be bringing in an outside kind of more objective person, right? Sometimes as a scientist, it's something you've worked on for years and now you're finally excited to spin it out and it's your own and we're going to build this great company. But I think sometimes you're too close to it, that you need to either take a step back or bring in somebody who is objective, and because you think it's great but you need ways to refine your message. And maybe if you keep saying the same message and no one is biting, it's time to change it up a little bit. And so I think that you don't want to linger too long without doing that. And I think sometimes that's where startups don't get their momentum, is because they linger too long focusing on what they want it to be instead of what maybe the market is dictating.
Absolutely.
So,
and I think that's incredibly prescient advice, because I think like, and I myself, I fall victim to like being wedded to my ideas, like sometimes too long. And like I could have saved myself like a ton of like time
Yeah.
here.
I mean,
But
we all do
exactly
it.
what you're right. That outside kind of stimulus is, it doesn't, it's kind of like you said, it's like, it is your baby. Like,
Yeah.
especially as a scientist, like, this is my baby. Like, I want to go the distance, but it always helps to have that like fresh pair of eyes to just be like,
Yeah.
all right, take a step back for like a moment. Can we?
Right.
And so, and it's painful. There's not to say that this is like, it's not fun. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like
And I think
exactly what you said.
it's scary. I think people, I've talked to some like clients who then start out on their own. Like I think it scares them to like let someone else take it. You're like, they're not going to do it the right way. I know how I want it to be done and some of this kind of stuff. So I think it's also it's like anything. Like it's scary. It's mine. It's scary. I want to own it. But sometimes then when you look back on it 2 years later, you're like, why was I so worried? Like,
Yeah.
you're like, why did I make such a big deal about it? I'm like, we all do it. You're like, why was
Yeah.
I so worried about that? It all kind of has its way of working out. So yeah, it's I think the objectiveness it works for us too. Like sometimes we'll be working on something. It's another great thing about the company. And you're like, I just can't figure it out. And you just keep beating your head against, the computer, trying to get like, why is the examiner not seeing my way? And then you talk to someone about it. Have you tried this? You're like, oh, no, I haven't tried that. It's like, it's as simple as walking away, asking somebody a question,
Yep.
and then maybe you get a new answer. Like,
Yeah.
no, I
And
never
it
thought of
helps
that.
person is like not necessarily like in the weeds with you,
Right.
because you're just like seeing the same thing. And I think about that from like just like organizational like culture, like as well. And like I think that's why it's so important to, at least I believe, that diversity in thought, perspective, and just like walks of life. And that's where you get that magic.
hmm
Where they're like, there's like maybe it's like someone who's on the software side, just like, why are you doing it this way? Like,
Right. Yeah. They're like, oh, when we get that problem, we just do this, or we
yeah,
can do this. You're like, oh, and yeah, it's someone perspective. You're like, oh, our technology would never go for it. It's like, have you tried it? Has anyone tried it? You never know until you try. And
yeah,
so we do a lot of that.
yeah. And I think the it and not, that's not to like poo poo on like sector experts and just like deep expertise either, right? Because I think
Yeah.
there's like incredible value for someone who can just like go super 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 deep and into the weeds of something. But it's kind of like having a balance of the two, of like
hmm
insider perspective, outsider perspective, whether it's in you're thinking about intellectual property, but also just like company building, and I would imagine with like firm building too. It's like
hmm
having that perspective really gives you, it's an edge. I think it's like a true edge. And but sometimes there is a time and place where we're just like, we got to bring in the Navy SEAL of this, like, and they just come in and just like are able to get it done. But yeah, that's like,
Yeah.
I think about that, especially as for Exceeder, which is small but mighty team, and we're continuing to grow, just like growing with intention, and just like not being necessarily like too beholden or just like looking for a specific type of resume, like being open to the idea that people can contribute to the conversation and like add unique perspectives coming from different walks of life. And like on our team, I mentioned like the service industry, food and hospitality, a marketing team has a lot of that experience, and they bring like a very interesting perspective. So when it comes to firm or organization and hiring, I think it's really important. And for as we are kind of like I know we're running close on time, but as you're looking forward, and maybe before we do before the prospective, we talk a little bit about the retrospective, just your time at Marshall Gerstein. Can you talk about just like what were like some big challenges and triumphs for you in your career, like as partner of the firm? Are there any like
Yeah.
kind of things that really stand out to you as you from going from the bench to partner?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time. Sometimes you push back the other memories where you're like,
yeah,
"Oh, I'm
yeah,
just not gonna remember that."
yeah, yeah.
No, but just coming in the first time you're reading a patent and, you're used to reading scientific papers, right? And patents are kind of scientific, but they're so, like I said, the language in them can be repetitive and it's very legalese. And so just kind of slogging through that and thinking, I will never get this. Like, this
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense to me. And then, now being in the position I'm in and we have trainees coming in and you tell them, you're like, I know it doesn't make sense, but just kind
Yep.
of read it. Like, I remember when I started,
Yeah.
it's kind of a learning curve, but it's a fun learning curve. It was very much a trial by fire type of thing. And I think here, the way we work, like all of our dates are on a docket. And I don't know if you ever watched Seinfeld, but Newman is like, it's like the mail, Jerry. It never stops.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
your docket never stops. There's always something to do.
Yeah.
And I remember one time I was probably a couple of years and it was a bigger client and I saw this date. I was like, oh, that's not important. And then the day before, he's like, do you have this? And it was like what's called the national phase deadline, which is entering all of the different countries. Like, and I almost missed this deadline, which would have been malpractice. We probably could have been sued.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, that my heart was just like pounding. I was like, I can't believe. Plus, in certain countries, it's already the next day. And so you're trying to scramble and like get hold of someone in China
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do this. And, I remember being kind of yelled at by the client. And then the partner's like, why didn't you do this earlier? Like, I didn't know it wasn't important. And so
Yeah.
just, getting through those kind of things that you've never, going through grad school, there's nothing like that, right? You're
Yeah.
not disappointing your PI or letting a whole company down.
Yeah.
And so, getting through the first time that you kind of have to do that and like apologize. And then you're like, I'm so sorry. And you're like, luckily nothing bad happened. But things like that. And you're like, there's rarely ever a patent emergency.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you don't think of it as a patent emergency, but every once in a while they come up.
Yeah. And you live to tell the tale, and
And
I
you
mean,
live to tell
and
the tale and
yeah,
you
and your partner out. And so I guess I'm curious, like, as I know the journey through a firm. That's kind of the, when you become partner, that's like a monumental, like moment. Can you talk about how just like what is the life and the like of being a partner?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's a little bit more responsibility than on some things than you wanted.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
everything. I've talked to other people like, congratulations, you're a management. You don't get to do your regular job anymore. You have to put out fires.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's great because, I've worked with some clients, the same person at the client for 15 years or something like that. And now that you're a partner and you've both been at these places a long time, it's just like you have the conversations and you're like, what's the business? What's the strategy? And like, where are we going? And so you get more ingrained into what the business purpose and the commercial purpose of your clients are and like what they're trying to do, which helps you become a much better lawyer for them, right? If I don't know what your objective is, I don't know how to help you achieve it. And so I think when you're a partner, you get to be privy to more of those types of conversations. It's so helpful. And that's how I think I've gotten the perspective. Like, I know what investors are looking for because I've talked to the client or I've had to be on due diligence calls when they're like, let's talk about how bad your patent portfolio is. You're like, no.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
this is a
Yeah.
very good portfolio.
Yeah.
But they're always trying to break it down, right? When investors are looking at it, they're like, well, this isn't as good as you say it is. They're always being the naysayers. And so I think, at this stage, you're hopefully confident enough to be like, no, this is what we're doing. This is a good strategy. And, it's going to be fine. And so it's been great to be on that end now.
Absolutely. It sounds like you get a very holistic view, which is a very unique vantage point.
Yeah, it is. And it's because I work with all sizes of clients. I also get to see the perspective from the big client and from the small client or university, what they're trying to do and achieve, and how, again, sometimes you're like, can I take what I know from these mid-size or these big clients? Is any of it useful to the small guys? Like, I can tell you what the big guys do, but you might not have money for money for that yet. But this is what you can strive for and maybe do a little bit of it now. Or, this is what I see my other clients doing. And so once you are able to get integrated into the client, it's really helpful.
And I think that's I think it's like an incredibly unique and valuable perspective and position that you're in, because and I always think about my friends who went in-house, who are formerly at firms. But you kind of lose that because now if you're in-house, you're doing very specific work for that specific company. But when you're at a firm, you're exactly what you're talking about. Work with the big folks, small, everything in between, academic. And that is just like every one of those experiences and client interactions is just like accretive. It just like adds, you can chime in and be like, yeah, exactly what he says. Like, this is what the big folks are doing. I don't know if it fits your budget, but this is their strategy. Maybe you can take something from that where you can afford it. But
or just plan for the future, right? This is how maybe in a few years, this is where you can go. But
very cool. And now, looking forward, 1-2 years out, what's in store for you and what's in store for Marshall Gerstein?
For me, it's probably more of the same. Like, I want to stay, working and integrating with my clients. The firm is growing. Luckily, we have a lot of work to be done, and we have some new fresh blood coming in at the patent agent level or the associate level. And kind of like what you were talking about too, we do try to get diverse people with diverse backgrounds. It's not easy per se. Like, in a strictly IP world, it can be difficult because, STEM, it's hard to get people to go into law sometimes. And then it's STEM lawyers. It's another, limiting factor. But we know a lot of our clients are, want to see a diverse candidate list of who might be handling their work. And so we also feel that, getting in diverse candidates and schools of thought is helpful. And so we're always looking for good candidates, and just kind of growing our client base. I think that's a good thing about, we're in Chicago, but everythting is so global, and with Zoom, it changed so much about client interactions and these kinds of things. A lot of our clients are based on the coasts, but we still want to, get those touch points back. It's been a long time coming, I think, getting people back in the office and trying to figure out how to go see our clients and get that relationship reestablished to some extent. So I think we're looking forward to, if there are any clients listening, when I say, can I come visit?
Like, can I come when visit? I say if it's not on Zoom, like, that doesn't count. Like, I actually will show up. And I think, the one thing that, like, coming out of the pandemic, I quickly realized, like, there's no replacement for human interaction. As much as, like, Zoom calls are lovely, and it kind of enables a lot of things, but there's nothing that replaces that. And I love to hear that you guys are, prioritizing kind of like diverse talent and talent pool as like a strength, rather than just like, oh, I just got to do this. Cause like, I think it's critically important. And that's like super exciting. And I guess just like a quick question, with you guys based in Chicago, and you mentioned having clients on the coast, do you guys have offices over there too? Or how do you handle kind of like these coast to coast work?
No offices on the coast. We do have another smaller office in Raleigh. We have a couple people that work out of there. The beauty is, for Boston or Maryland, DC, some of those hubs on the East Coast, it's a 2-hour flight from Chicago. So you can go in day out.
Like equidistant.
You can, it's easy enough to do it in and out if needed. Go to a meeting. A lot of times if we have clients on the West Coast, we'll try to stack some of the visits and say, all right, I'm going to be here these 3 days and get some quality client visits in. But, we're willing to travel. I think as people are starting to come back, it's not too bad. And we we do like CLEs or other things. So we try to incentivize people. It's like, come get your CLE so you don't have to.
Yeah. You can get two birds, one stone.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
So it's like training. We do a lot of training I've done some training for clients on like trade secrets and confidentiality. So we'll do various programs to help integrate it into the client and stuff. But
cool.
Like you're saying, nothing replaces that personal interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And, first off, I want to thank you, Kate, for your time. You've been very generous. And in traditional closing fashion for the podcast, there are two closing questions.
Okay.
First is, would you like to give any shout outs to anyone who supported you along the way?
I was like, that's a hard question. I'd turn into some like bad Academy Award speech. I was like, I'd like to thank. I'd leave somebody out. I was like, oh, they know who they are. But no, there were a lot of partners early on that just the people that took the time, early on are the people you should thank, and like even, in graduate school, like Steve Miller and just all the training there, but just the partners here. And then my friends who listen to you complain and say, I can't get past this examiner and give you advice. So I was like, I could give so many shout outs. It would take another 20 minutes.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, I always have to thank my wife. I'm just like, God, you're hitting me. No one else at the company knows, but she's just like, all right, Jon, enough. But all right, can you get a couple more? Okay, let's watch TV now.
Yeah, you're like, that's a standard, of course. My husband, who's also in the science world, but not a lawyer, so it works out.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the second closing question: if you can give any advice to your 21-year-old self, what would it be?
I'd like to think that I was pretty like flexible and open. I wasn't like, this is how my life is gonna be, but I never ever thought, oh, lawyer is on the list of things. Lawyer is on the number one thing that I'm gonna be when I grow up. And so I think just tell yourself, be open to new possibilities and don't be scared to take that leap of faith. Things will work out. Whatever it is, they have a way of working out, I think, for the best. And so you just have to be able to see the opportunity and to seize it and take it for what it is.
I honestly don't know if there's a better way to round things out. And that's advice that I would take myself too. I think just like sometimes you just need to like hear that it's gonna be all right.
Yeah.
Because there's like sometimes those like dark times where you have that existential dread. It's like, right. For me, at least at the bench, it's like, what am I gonna do with this? What am I gonna do with all this? But it ends up, every experience is additive to that. And
it's like, try not to let you get it down. Like it's easier to decide. It's kind of a trite thing, but in law school, like the first semester was like, oh, why am I doing this? It's so painful, but you're like, just kind of get through it, take it for what it is. And
absolutely. Well, Kate, thank you so much. I could go hours and hours and hours with you. And maybe when you are doing your travel, maybe when we have JPM coming up, if you're at JPM, I'd love to connect with you while you're in town. If not, maybe I'll see you in Chicago or in Boston.
That'd be great. Yeah, let me know. No, this has been excellent. Thank you so much for having me. It's fun.
Thank you. I've had a lot of fun, and I'll be talking to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks, Kate.
Bye-bye.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our 4-part series with Kate Neville. Be sure to tune in for our next series with Cyriac Roding, founder, investor, and CEO of Early. Early is on a mission to transform cancer into a benign experience. Using innovative gene therapy approaches, Early's technology forces cancer cells to produce a synthetic, non-human biomarker, overcoming the limitations of relying on naturally occurring biomarkers that cancer may or may not provide. Cyriac is a serial entrepreneur who loves challenging missions that move the world forward. As a founder and investor, he has created and supported ventures at the intersection of the physical and digital worlds, including investing in leading startups like OpenAI, and serving as CEO of Shopkick, which was acquired for $250 million by SK Group, a Fortune 100 from South Korea. His current focus, early, has raised nearly $60 million from top investors like Andreessen Horowitz, Khosla Ventures, Perceptive Advisors, Casting Capital, Sands Capital, Mark Benioff, Menlo Ventures, and Zen Fund. Cyriac's journey from launching his first startup at 15 to being named a World Economic Forum Tech Pioneer is nothing short of remarkable, and his insights into founding and building successful startups makes for an invaluable conversation that founders won't want to miss. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.